Life has never been balanced. It wasn't in the past, it isn't now, and it won't magically become fair in the future. Accepting this fact isn't negativity, it's clarity. Recognizing the absence of fairness is the first requirement for building true strength and creating meaningful results. For decades, people have been raised on the comforting myth that justice rules the world, that merit is always rewarded, and that following the rules guarantees success. But pause for a moment and examine the reality surrounding you. Do you honestly see fairness determining who wins and who loses? Do you consistently notice the most honest, disciplined, and hard-working people at the top? Or do you see something else, people who grasp how the system truly functions and use that understanding to their advantage? From the time you were a child, you were likely told that if you play fair, work hard, and follow the guidelines, good fortune will naturally flow to you. And yet, as you grew, you watched others, often less talented, less ethical, or less hard-working, rise faster, gain influence, and secure opportunities you expected to be yours. That repeated observation plants seeds of anger, envy, and frustration. It drains your confidence and leaves you powerless because you're measuring reality against an illusion. This is where Niccolò Machiavelli's wisdom becomes indispensable. He didn't waste his time writing about how life should ideally work. He documented how it truly unfolds. He studied the ruthless mechanics of human behavior and power, and his writings expose the truth most people would rather deny. People are selfish, changeable, greedy, and easily deceived. This isn't cynicism, it's accuracy. Once you accept human nature as it is, not as you wish it to be, you immediately gain leverage. You stop being blindsided by betrayal or favoritism, and you start making sharper, more effective decisions. The biggest weakness created by blind faith in fairness is dependence. It leaves you waiting on other people's sense of morality instead of relying on your own ability to create results. It teaches you to sit quietly, expecting recognition instead of building undeniable value. It makes you passive instead of strategic. This is why Machiavelli's realism matters more today than ever before. By the end of this discussion, you'll understand how to step out of the trap of waiting for fairness and step into a life built on competence, awareness, and power. Illusion has shown fairness as a weak foundation. Fairness is comforting. It promises that effort will be rewarded, that justice will eventually win, and that good people will receive the recognition they deserve. But as comforting as that belief feels, it is a dangerous illusion. It ties your fate to external validation instead of internal capability. When you anchor your success to whether others treat you fairly, you develop what psychology calls an external locus of control. In simple terms, you start believing your outcomes depend on others' approval, decisions, or recognition instead of your own actions. This mindset is poisonous. Imagine working day and night on a project, expecting acknowledgement, only to see someone else, perhaps with better connections, take the spotlight. Or picture yourself following every rule, expecting a promotion, but the advancement goes to someone who plays office politics more effectively. You give flawless service, but customers drift to competitors for price or convenience. If you view life through the fairness lens, every one of these moments feels like an injustice, and injustice breeds resentment. Resentment clouds judgment, kills motivation, and weakens your ability to act strategically. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago. He who seeks to deceive will always find someone willing to be deceived. When you expect fairness, you become the perfect target for those who know the game isn't played on fair terms. You are predictable, exploitable, and fragile because you act based on idealistic expectations instead of reality. The damage doesn't stop there. Reliance on fairness breeds three destructive patterns: Emotional instability. Your confidence rises and falls depending on how fairly you feel treated. Resentment. Your focus shifts from building strength to obsessing over perceived injustice. Passivity. Instead of asserting your value, you wait for others to notice it. None of this means you should abandon ethics or treat people without respect. Ethics and fairness are not the same thing. Ethics are principles you choose to live by, while fairness is an external condition you cannot control. You can remain ethical and principled while being realistic enough to stop depending on fairness for your survival. The antidote is shifting from fairness dependence to capability dependence. That means grounding your life not in hope for recognition, but in building skills, resilience, and strategic competence. It means asking, how do I win, even if the rules aren't in my favor? Capability dependence turns you into a force others cannot ignore, regardless of how fair they choose to be. Illusion #2. Misreading human nature. Most people assume others are consistently rational, grateful, and loyal. They expect honesty to be the default and fairness to be the guiding principle. But this worldview is a trap. It blinds you to the fact that human nature contains both light and shadow, both honesty and deception, both loyalty and betrayal. Machiavelli's writings on human behavior weren't meant to convince you that people are evil. They were meant to prepare you for reality. Under pressure, fear, or greed, people's darker impulses often surface. They may deceive, abandon loyalty, or prioritize their own gain over your shared interests. If you walk through life assuming people will always act in noble ways, you set yourself up for failure. The key is to understand that human behavior follows patterns. People act in ways that serve what they perceive as their best interest, even when that perception is flawed. Loyalty is strongest when it is rewarded. Honesty appears when honesty is incentivized. Fairness surfaces when fairness aligns with self-interest. This doesn't mean giving up on positive qualities in people. It means designing environments where cooperation, loyalty, and honesty are rewarded. And betrayal or dishonesty carries consequences. When you grasp this, you stop being surprised when loyalties shift, partnerships sour, or promises are broken. Instead, you prepare for it. You structure agreements to protect yourself. You read the undercurrents of social dynamics. You anticipate changes before they arrive. That preparation is what gives you strategic advantage. This is not manipulation, it's wisdom. By recognizing what motivates people, you can create alliances that genuinely serve everyone's interests while protecting your own. You learn to communicate more effectively, to craft proposals that others can't easily refuse, and to build resilience against betrayal. Illusion #3. Complaining about unfairness. Here is another harsh truth. Constantly pointing out unfairness makes you weaker, not stronger. When you openly complain about how unjustly you're treated, you reveal yourself as powerless. You tell the world, I have no control, I am at the mercy of circumstances. That signals vulnerability. And in a competitive environment, signaling vulnerability invites exploitation. More dangerously, complaining convinces you that you are a victim. It reinforces a mindset where you see yourself as helpless instead of capable. Victimhood becomes your identity. Once that happens, unfairness will follow you everywhere, not because the world is uniquely cruel to you, but because you've trained yourself to interpret every setback as proof of injustice. The stronger path is to replace complaint with adaptation. When you face unfairness, ask 3 questions. What lesson does this reveal? How can I prevent being exposed in the same way again? What new skill or strength must I develop to overcome this challenge next time? When you operate this way, unfairness becomes fuel for growth instead of a cage for weakness, building real strength. The ultimate goal is not to become cynical or manipulative. It is to become realistic and capable. Fairness is pleasant when it exists, and yes, you can work to promote fairness in your environment. But you must never depend on it. Your strength should come from your own competence, adaptability, and strategic awareness. This means developing emotional control so your mood isn't dictated by external treatment. It means sharpening your strategic mind so you see beneath surface appearances. It means focusing on value creation, not just effort. And it means building alliances based not on abstract fairness, but on mutual benefit. When you embrace these shifts, you stop asking, "Why isn't life fair to me?" and start asking, "How can I succeed regardless of whether it's fair or not?" That is the mindset of resilience. That is the mindset of power. And that is the path to building a life that cannot be taken from you, no matter how unfair the game becomes. When people face situations they perceive as unfair, their first instinct is often to complain. Complaining feels good in the moment. It releases pent-up frustration. It draws sympathy from others, and it momentarily validates one's sense of being wronged. Yet, the very act that feels comforting in the short term erodes strength and respect over the long haul. Complaints rarely shift outcomes in your favor. Instead, they quietly communicate weakness, reinforce victimhood, and invite opportunists to test your boundaries even more. The truth is, venting about unfairness serves as an emotional outlet, but it doesn't solve anything. Some listeners may nod with sympathy, but sympathy doesn't change how people treat you. Others, especially the ambitious or opportunistic, see complaints as cracks in your armor, signals that you lack resilience. In competitive environments, that perception can be costly. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this when he advised that an opponent should either be crushed completely or treated with generosity, never merely irritated, because small grievances invite retaliation. In the same way, constant whining about minor slights portrays you as fragile, whereas decisive, strategic responses to major injustices establish authority. Even more damaging than how others view your complaints is how your own mind interprets them. Every time you vocalize how unjustly you've been treated, you train your brain to view yourself as powerless. Neuroscience shows that repeated patterns of thought reinforce neural pathways. If those pathways are, "I am a victim," your mindset gradually shapes your reality. Complaining strengthens the identity of powerlessness, making it harder to think creatively, strategically, or decisively when real challenges arise. Focusing too much on unfairness also diverts your mental energy toward what lies outside of your control, other people's choices, systems, or biases. Energy invested in lamenting circumstances is energy stolen from skill building, adaptation, and strategic moves, the very tools that could make you less vulnerable next time. Every ounce of attention directed toward how others should behave is an ounce of power lost in what you could do differently. The stronger alternative is not to silence every emotion, but to convert frustration into strategy. Instead of releasing tension through complaint, redirect that energy into analysis. Why is this happening? What dynamics are in play? What patterns keep repeating? Which blind spots in my approach left me exposed? What adjustments would protect me better in the future? This kind of thinking shifts your role from a powerless victim to an adaptive strategist. Strategic response also demands emotional discipline. This doesn't mean pretending you're not angry or disappointed. It means refusing to let those feelings dictate your actions. Anger and resentment can cloud judgment and sabotage opportunities. By processing emotions privately, then responding with clarity, you turn what could have been reckless complaints into measured, effective steps forward. Notice how the questions differ between a complainer and a strategist. The complainer asks, "Why me? Why is this happening? Why can't they treat me fairly?" The strategist asks, "What does this reveal about their priorities? How should I reposition myself to get the result I want? What skill or leverage do I need to prevent this next time?" The first line of questioning leads to helplessness. The second builds capability. Every time you choose analysis over complaint, you build resilience and credibility. Over time, others begin to see you not as someone who cries foul, but as someone who adapts and grows stronger, no matter the obstacle. There are moments when calling out unfairness directly is necessary, but this is not the same as habitual complaining. The difference lies in delivery. Complaining is venting without solutions. Assertive communication, on the other hand, calmly identifies a problem, proposes corrective actions, and makes clear what outcomes you expect. One diminishes respect, the other earns it. Assertive communication is future-focused, solution-oriented, and rooted in self-respect rather than victimhood. In professional settings, this distinction is critical. Managers, colleagues, and leaders often interpret repeated complaints as evidence of fragility, poor judgment, or an inability to handle pressure. Even when your grievances are justified, framing them as complaints undermines your reputation. What builds respect is the ability to address unfairness with clarity, composure, and a plan of action. Shifting from complaint-driven to strategy-driven thinking takes practice. When you feel the urge to complain, resist speaking immediately. Instead, write down the situation and dissect it. What chain of events created it? What choices, yours or others, enabled it? How could you shift your approach so that next time you're less exposed? This practice gradually rewires your response patterns away from victimhood toward problem solving. Does this mean you should tolerate every injustice silently? Absolutely not. It means you should be selective in which battles you fight and deliberate in how you fight them. Complaining about every small slight wastes energy and weakens your image. Responding decisively and strategically to significant injustices, however, builds authority and earns respect. Here's a challenge. For 1 week, monitor yourself. Every time you want to complain about unfair treatment, pause and redirect the impulse. Ask yourself, what can I learn here? What new capability would make me invulnerable to this next time? What leverage could I create to prevent recurrence? If you start practicing this discipline, you'll notice something remarkable. Others begin testing you less, while opportunities to lead and influence grow. The law of perception is simple. Complaints signal weakness, while strategic responses radiate strength. If you want respect, stop showing others your helplessness. Instead, show them your adaptability. Competence versus entitlement. Real power doesn't come from loudly declaring what you deserve. It comes from competence, the irrefutable ability to create results, deliver solutions, and provide value regardless of circumstances. This is the essence of sustainable strength. Entitlement, on the other hand, is fragile. It assumes that effort, credentials, or moral behavior automatically entitle you to rewards. But entitlement is dependent on recognition by others, which you cannot control. Competence is independent. It makes you valuable, even if others resist acknowledging it. When someone is passed over for a promotion, entitlement-based thinking says, "This is unfair. I deserved better treatment." Competence-based thinking says, "Clearly, I didn't position myself as undeniable. What skill, network, or achievement would remove all doubt next time?" The second mindset leads to growth. The first leads only to bitterness. Machiavelli warned that any power built solely on the goodwill of others rests on unstable ground. He who builds on the people builds on mud. Relationships matter, yes, but they are unstable unless backed by your own undeniable capability. The safest power comes from being someone whose skills or results cannot easily be ignored or replaced. Building this kind of power requires an honest assessment of your field. What skills or knowledge are rare and valuable? Which abilities are becoming obsolete? Competence-based thinkers continuously refine themselves to stay ahead of shifting demands. They don't cling to past achievements, they create new ones. Every solved problem, every mastered skill, every successful project compounds into greater credibility, which in turn attracts more opportunities. Competence also requires humility. Believing you've already learned enough creates stagnation. Genuine strength grows from a mindset of constant improvement, an awareness that today's mastery may be tomorrow's mediocrity if you stop learning. And competence isn't only technical. Emotional intelligence, the ability to manage your own emotions while influencing others, is just as crucial. Communication, persuasion, empathy, and alliance building are forms of competence that expand your influence far beyond individual skill. Combine these with technical capability, and your value becomes undeniable. Entitlement says, "I deserve fairness." Competence says, "I create value so strong that fairness becomes irrelevant." Strategic thinking over moral outrage. When faced with injustice, most people default to moral outrage. They feel anger, indignation, and the urge to punish wrongdoers. While this emotional response is understandable, it often clouds judgment and undermines effectiveness. Outrage might provide temporary satisfaction, but it rarely creates lasting solutions. Strategic thinkers see the world differently. Instead of asking, "What should happen?" they ask, "What is actually happening, and how do I navigate it?" They analyze motivations, incentives, and constraints. They design responses that maximize long-term results, not just short-term feelings. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics. It means separating ethics from tactics. You can remain principled while choosing methods that serve your objectives. Sometimes direct confrontation is best. Sometimes indirect influence works better. Sometimes stepping back to reposition yourself yields the greatest advantage. Strategy allows flexibility in execution while holding firm to values. Consider this. When a colleague steals credit for your work, outrage might push you to complain loudly. But strategic thinking might push you to document contributions more carefully, strengthen alliances with decision-makers, and make your work visible in ways that prevent theft. Both approaches address unfairness, but one protects your future while the other only vents frustration. Strategic thinkers play a longer game. They ask, "How will my reaction today affect my reputation tomorrow? Will it strengthen or weaken my position a year from now?" They're willing to endure short-term slights to secure long-term strength. The practice of strategy requires emotional regulation. Feel the anger, but don't act from it. Channel it into analysis. Study patterns, incentives, and systems. Understand not just individuals, but the dynamics that shape their choices. When you respond, do so with precision, not impulse. Machiavelli's reminder was clear. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few know what you really are. Appearances matter. If you let outrage define your visible actions, others will see volatility. If you respond with strategy, they will see strength. Who really holds the power to decide? What drives their actions? In what form do they accept and process information? And most importantly, which strategies can actually shift their perspective? These are the kinds of questions that shape effective responses, far more than simply appealing to morality. Strategic thinking is not something you're born with. It's a skill that strengthens with practice. Every time you resist reacting emotionally and instead examine the situation with a clear, calculated approach, you sharpen your ability to think strategically. Over time, this mindset becomes second nature. Of course, there are moments when an immediate moral stand is the right path, especially when genuine abuse or gross injustice is involved. But the real mastery lies in knowing when swift moral action is necessary and when a strategic approach will serve you better in the long run. When confronted with unfair treatment, don't make your first move public outrage. Instead, take time to process your emotions privately. Once you've calmed the initial response, step back and assess. What are the root causes of the behavior? What hidden motivations drive the people involved? Which possible responses will not only address the current issue, but also prevent similar challenges from arising again? And finally, how can you act in a way that honors your values while also protecting your effectiveness? Outrage points to how things should be. Strategy deals with how things are and, more importantly, how to shift reality in your favor. Both play a role, but it's usually strategy that secures stronger, lasting results. Another powerful step in breaking free from dependence on fairness is creating your own standards for success. This means no longer measuring yourself by whether others recognize or reward you, but instead setting internal benchmarks that reflect your own growth and values. Relying on outside validation makes you fragile, because your sense of worth rests in other people's hands. When acknowledgement doesn't arrive, when promotions or rewards are unevenly distributed, or when your efforts go unseen, you may feel like a failure even when your accomplishments are real. Internal standards change that dynamic. Instead of chasing applause, you measure progress by your skills, by the value you bring, and by how close you move toward goals that matter to you personally. This creates steady motivation because it isn't tied to others' judgment. Even if recognition is slow or absent, you can maintain drive because your own criteria carry weight. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback or detaching from reality. It means learning to trust your own evaluation while still being open to information from outside sources. Niccolò Machiavelli emphasized this independence centuries ago. Those who rely on fortune or others' favor are always at risk. But those who become masters of their own judgment and actions command respect. By creating your own definition of success, you shift from being controlled by others' sense of fairness to taking ownership of your destiny. The key advantage of internal standards is that they're based on elements you can control: your effort, your persistence, your problem-solving ability, and your steady development of competence. No one can take those from you. This requires clarity about what you actually want. What values drive you? What long-term outcomes matter most? Which skills do you need to master to get there? Once you answer those questions, you can create personal milestones that reflect true progress, independent of whether anyone else notices. The psychological benefit is enormous. Instead of your motivation rising and falling based on how others treat you, it stays stable, anchored to what you control. This stability makes you calmer in your decision-making and stronger in moments when external validation is missing. It also speeds up growth. When you measure yourself consistently, you don't need to wait for others to evaluate you. You see your own strengths and gaps clearly, adjust, and move faster toward improvement. Internal standards are not about lowering the bar. In fact, they're often tougher than external ones. Why? Because they reflect your genuine pursuit of excellence instead of minimum requirements set by someone else. Every time you meet the goals you've set for yourself, you build proof of your own capability. That proof strengthens your confidence, making you less dependent on applause from others. Over time, this independence builds real resilience. There's also a strategic edge. If you aren't reliant on recognition, you can pursue bold projects, explore original ideas, and invest in long-term growth without worrying about whether others approve right away. Many breakthroughs come from this mindset, and recognition often follows later. The important balance is to prioritize your internal standards while still staying aware of external realities, so that you adapt when needed without being ruled by them. The process of building internal standards evolves with time. You start with the best version of what you think success means, then refine it as your experience grows. The essentials are simple. Identify what you want, regardless of others' reactions. Break it down into measurable milestones. Review your progress regularly, and celebrate your own wins, even if no one else claps for you. This practice builds independence, strength, and genuine confidence in a way external validation never can. At the core of this mindset shift is a hard truth. Depending on fairness for your success makes you weak. It puts your fate in other people's decisions. But relying on your own capabilities, your skills, your value creation, your ability to act strategically makes you strong, no matter how unfair the world becomes. Fairness feels comforting as an idea, but in practice, it exposes you to disappointment and exploitation by those who know that fairness isn't the rule of the game. By understanding human nature clearly, as Machiavelli described, self-interested, shaped by circumstance, and rarely guided by pure fairness, you gain an edge. Instead of complaining when the world isn't fair, you learn to predict behavior, design stronger interactions, and build relationships that serve real outcomes. Complaining broadcasts weakness. Responding strategically builds power. Power rooted in competence, in solving problems and delivering results, is sustainable. It earns respect and cannot easily be taken away. Strategy doesn't dismiss morality. It enhances it by ensuring your principles are backed by effectiveness. Creating your own standards of success keeps you focused, motivated, and less vulnerable to manipulation or neglect. Ultimately, this is about shifting from dependence to independence, from fragile hopes of fairness to the strength of strategic capability. The choice is yours. Stay reactive, waiting for fairness, or take control by building the power to succeed whether or not others play fair. True strength comes from creating value, solving problems, and advancing toward your goals on your own terms. If this resonates, carry one thought with you. I choose strength over dependence on fairness. That choice can redefine not only your outcomes, but your entire approach to life's challenges and opportunities. Because when you stop begging for fairness and start building capability, you become someone others cannot ignore, and someone who succeeds regardless of the world's unfairness.